Hello everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast as part of the Labs Squad Omega. This audio podcast as part of Storm Mode Squad. This audio podcast as part of, excuse me, as part of a ZtormLabostix production. In this audio podcast, a look at some works by Mohammed and team from 2026, and a look at understanding coping, or a review of coping in young people with CKD, and where coping a review of young people coping with CKD, and in context of coping and stress. And This audio podcast will be an intro. So in young people, coping with health conditions is coping in young people coping with health conditions is inherently interconnected with developmental and age-related factors that influence adaptations to stressors. Research surrounding coping in young people presents unique challenges, as coping responses and perspectives often differ from those observed in adult populations. There also has been a rise or increase in research intrigue, particularly within the psychological, psychosocial, and immunological, and neurobiological systems involved in coping and stress and adaptation. Research has also increasingly attempted to better understand human pathophysiology with the immune and neuroendocrine functioning and although interactions between these systems remain complex and dynamic, although these sorry between these systems remain sort of complex and dynamic. Research investigating coping and stress has also increasingly investigated the interconnections between neuroendocrine, autonomic, and immune systems, including the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and peripheral immune responses in relation to health and disease. Um, over the past several decades, coping in young people has been investigated primarily on self-report sort of self-report or validated sort of surveys, including questionnaires, and uh, including surveys or questionnaires based and ambulatory assessment methods. Contemporary coping research defines coping as sort of involving cognitive, emotional, and behavioral responses to stress, encompassing both conscious and automatic regulatory processes. Coping responses in young people are typically context specific, with individuals drawing on different strategies depending on the nature of stressful event. However, additional translational research is important to help clarify how these mechanisms, or the mechanistics, interact across different CKD contexts. So for healthcare providers, or healthcare providers supporting the development of adaptive coping strategies in young people with and across varying chronic illnesses or conditions has important clinical and psychosocial implications. Within the stress and coping paradigm or paradox, coping is sort of viewed as a dynamic and continually changing process involving cognitive and emotional and behavioral efforts to manage internal and external demands, particularly when stressors are perceived as challenging or overwhelming. Coping may, at the same time, also function as adaptive regulatory process that supports healthy adjustments to stressful, challenging, and demanding scenarios or situations, especially during childhood and adolescence. That draws this audio podcast intro to a close. This audio podcast is part of the Labzquad Omega. This audio podcast is part of the Storm Mode Squad. This audio podcast is part of a ZtormLabostix production.